Hey guys, this week we're going to be working on this cervix case right here. Okay, we got this PTV, this orange PTV going to 50.4 gray. And I have a few of these OARs contoured. The blank OARs, I'm going to ask you guys to contour, all right? I'm going to give you a website to use other than Prono. That's just a good resource for contouring. So for example, if you're unfamiliar on how to contour the bone marrow, I want you guys to use this website that I'm going to give you to look up how to do that. All right, so let's jump right in. This week should be fairly simple. This week's all about repetition. So just repetition using the optimizer. Let's insert a new plan. Select my PTV. $6X. All right, our prescription is going to be 180 times 28. I'm going to use the arc geometry tool. I'm going to use 2 full rotations. All right, and I'm going to show you guys one thing that I sometimes look at. So I think it's always best to look at the shape of your PTV, right? And the OARs that you are going to want to be avoiding. Okay, you can use that information to come up with what collimator angle you think might be best. In this case, you know, this 30 degrees kind of matches up with the angle of this PTV. It looks like it'll be able to block out the rectum fairly well. Over here, we rotate around. We'll be able to get the bladder, you know, at these angles. So I think 30 is okay. But if you look here, this X jaw right here, 19 cm, that is more than 15, right? And if we rotate over here, this PTV is fairly wide. So there are cases where the jaws could potentially, or Eclipse could potentially want those jaws to be more than 15 cm wide. So we're going to want to limit this X jaw right here. Something you can do is kind of play with this angle right here and see if you can find an angle where that X jaw is not so wide. So right now 18.9 didn't really come down much. 15, 19.1, 21. So there's not really a better angle, it doesn't look like, where that's going to get a whole lot smaller. I'm just going to stick with that 30, okay? But that's just a quick little trick that you can use. You know, just play with that number and try to get this total X width to be as small as possible. And then, of course, you're going to want to, you know, look at your angle too and see if that's going to work out in terms of blocking your OARs properly. So in this case, I think 30 is fine, and we checked it. It's going to block out our OARs perfectly fine. So what we're going to have to do, or what I want to do in order to shrink this down a little bit, from this field 1, I'm going to shrink down X1. Okay, get it closer to 15, 15.8, close enough, I think. You can see we're missing some PTV now, but from field 2, we'll leave X1 alone, shrink down X2. So from each fields, we'll be missing a little PTV, but at every angle, field 2 is missing. So field 2 is missing at 179. At 179 from this field, we'll be catching that PTV since we chose different jaws to bring down. Makes sense, right? So field 1, bring down X1. Field 2, we bring down X2. So the PTV, still we get a look at every part of the PTV at every angle between both fields, okay? Got our prescription in. Hop into the optimizer. Change this to PO. All right. Start with our PTV. 5040, 0 at 5292, priority at 100, NTOs at 100. I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right, so what I want to see is our PTV, get pretty much perfect coverage, right? I want this line to be very straight up and down, very good coverage up here, no hot spots. In general, you want your dose to shape out pretty well. You want it to be pretty conformal, because again, that's all we're asking for right now. Coverage, no hot spots, conformality with our NTO. So it should look really good right away in the beginning. We're gonna wait until it gets to step 3. If I had a GTV or CTV, I probably would throw those in here too, but we only have this PTV, so that's all we're using right now. All right, step 3, I'm gonna pause it, let it think just a little bit. This graph is coming down, right? We're getting lower and lower. That means it's coming up with better and better solutions to the problem we've given it, aka the objectives that we've put in here. All right, it starts to level out. I'm going to start adding in my OARs. So let's just start with an EUD. So we're at about 4,300 right now. So maybe I put 4,100 at 50. I just have my alpha value of 1 right now. So all we're looking at is the mean dose, okay? Same exact thing as if I just put this constraint in. See, the numbers are exactly the same here, just the mean dose. All right, same exact thing. You can see quite a bit of our bladder. This patient right here has a very tiny bladder, very small bladder. We're not gonna be able to spare much of the bladder. And you can get a really quick, easy sense of about how much of the bladder is overlapping by where this this bend is. So you can see about 40%, maybe a little bit over 40% of the bladder is overlapping with our PTV. So you gotta be a little careful with this EUD because it'll start eating away at your coverage pretty quickly. But it came down to 41, no problem. Let's try a little bit more. So if we kind of scroll through here, everywhere where this PTV is overlapping with the bladder, you can see it's starting to get cold there, right? Losing a little coverage there anteriorly. So we don't want to push too much on this. Might go a little bit lower. Might throw an upper on here. Just to start pushing this lower part of the line down a little bit, get some of that lower dose out of there. All right, so we'll let that keep thinking. Let's move on to the rectum and do the same thing. It's at about 3,550, something like that. Let's try 3,300. Just slowly bringing the dose down on both of these structures. Coverage is still looking pretty good. We're at our EUD level right here on the bladder. So I'm going to drop that down a little bit more. The rectum, not getting all the way down to 28 super fast at least, but we'll push a little harder on that too. All right, so I'm doing 90% of my planning right here in step 3, right? Level 1, step 3. if after you guys contour some of these other OARs, you know, you'll add your constraints to those here as well. I'll give you some constraints to look at, but the others shouldn't be a problem to meet. Okay, I'll probably ask for you to keep keep hot spots out of the bowel, so you might have to add an upper on your bowel or your sigmoid, but other than that, they should be fine. So our plan's looking okay. We can just keep pushing a little bit more on some of these. So right now, I'm not looking at my constraints. I'm just, in general, getting the plan to look as best as I think it can look, right? Regardless of what the constraints I give you are, okay? So I'm just shaping it out. I'm looking at my dose. I'm looking at my DVH, and I'm trying to get this plan to look as best as I think it can based on the anatomy we're given and the volumes we're given. After you do that, then you're going to want to look at your constraints and start pushing on those specific locations, right? So starting to lose a little bit of coverage. And that is what I want to see. I want to push on these OARs a little bit past where I actually should be, right? I want to push a little too hard on these OARs until I lose a little bit of coverage. Okay, that's the goal. We're getting this tail down here, this hot spot down here, getting a little cold spot up here. Probably about to where we want to stop. Usually, there's no hard rules when you're optimizing, but I'd say usually when I get to a point where my actual dose here on my EUD constraint is about 1 gray higher than what I have in here, while I'm still at a priority of 50, right? We haven't messed with priorities. Target's 100, OER's 50s. Once I get to a point where my EUD is about 1 gray from where I'm telling it to be and holding, that means you're probably about stuck. You're about done with your EUD constraints at least. So these are slowly coming down, so would maybe spend a little bit more time with these, right? But for the sake of this video, it's definitely slowing down. We're getting pretty close. So for the sake of the video, we're gonna just let it go. We're not getting a whole lot of movement anymore. But the key is, you know, we're pushing pretty hard on these. We lost some coverage, got the hot spot. You can see when we get to step 4 and step 5, we get this big spike. So as always, good idea to pause it, let that level out. So I'm gonna pause it just for a little bit in this video. You can see, I mean, we were in step 3 way up here, right? Get into later steps, step 4, step 5, something has changed with that algorithm, right? Something different is happening in the background. And now all of a sudden this cost function is able to come down quite a bit lower. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about these levels, this cost function, these graphs in our next class. All right. And after we do that, it'll start to make more sense. All right, so it looks like it's still coming down. I mean, we can still hold it here. Another big spike. Good idea to pause. And you know, pausing versus letting things play out, and it's a balance between efficiency and, you know, your output, your quality of your plan. Both are important. So it's not like I don't sit here and let it completely level out at every time for every plan. My plan's looking great and everything, and you don't think you're going to see much improvement, I mean, you can play. But again, that all just comes with experience. It's going to be a big part of this semester too. Just repetition, getting used to the optimizer. You'll start to recognize patterns and figure out when you should let it level out completely, when you can kind of cheat a little bit and move on, things like that. All right. Level 2, step 1, we're going to add a couple constraints. So we always have a tiny little cold spot, sometimes more of a colder spot than others. We want to get rid of that. And we always have a little bit of a hot spot, little tail. We want to get rid of that. So I'm going to add an extra lower on my PTV, 97, 98%, something like that. And I'm going to put slightly over my prescription dose at 120. So we're just trying to move this shoulder, you know, up and to the right, improve our coverage up here. And we're going to put an upper on the body, 0%, 105% of our volume, 300, 400 or priority, something like that, something really high. Body's really big volume. It's obviously the biggest volume. So you got to put a high priority in order for the optimizer to really do anything there. All right. If you're looking at this and it's just not getting rid of that tail or not moving like you think it should, just go ahead and bump that up another 100. All right. So again, we could, you know, pause it here for a little while, but for the sake of the video, I'm going to push play. Always a good idea to scroll through. Make sure everything's looking okay. These up in these early levels, you know, your lines will be all jaggedy and kind of weird looking. That's okay. That's to be expected. I'm just kind of in general looking at all my lines and seeing if they're all, you know, bunched and kind of shaped out well. I always like to look at all of my planes. You can definitely notice different problems a little bit easier in different views. Everything's looking pretty good though, I think. In the sagittal view, this is what I want to see. I want to see that 50 line, really all my lines really tight to my PTV in the area of, you know, the rectum and the bladder where we're pushing dose out of those OERs. So that looks good. I don't really touch anything else in terms of my objectives in level 2 other than adding that extra lower on all my targets, that upper on the body. Once I get to level 3, I'm definitely going to let it level out. This is where I start to, you know, fine tune. So if I'm just 1% or 2% off on some of my constraints, I might start bumping these priorities up slowly, 10, 20 at a time until I'm finally meeting that constraint. It's also a good time if you're way off of a constraint that you're trying to meet, like we're just way off, you know, you can kind of evaluate. And so for example, on the rectum right now, you can tell we're pushing pretty hard on the rectum. We're getting dose out of there. If we had a constraint like way down here, like 2000, less than 20% or something on this OAR, obviously we're not going to get this line to come way down here and still maintain our coverage. And I know that just based on how I pushed in level 1 and just looking at this dose, it's just not going to happen. It's impossible. So it's a good idea maybe to just stop right here and have a conversation with your physician on what they want to do. You can just tell them, not going to get coverage and meet that constraint. I could lose coverage and just show you what it takes to meet that constraint, or, you know, maybe he'll have a more relaxed constraint for you, something like that. So if you're a few percent off, you know, definitely you're going to shoot for meeting that in level 3. But if you're more than that, you know, have a talk with your doc, basically. Communicating earlier rather than later, always important. So anyways, I would fine tune in level 3. Definitely like pausing in level 3. You see a lot of improvement happen in level 3. Everything starts to really smooth out in level 3. See, all your lines are really starting to smooth out. You get rid of all that jaggedy look. So again, in the clinic, I would keep this paused a little bit longer, but we'll just let it play out. Level 4, usually I'm not touching anything in level 4. I might just pause it as usual. Once it gets done here, it's going to do intermediate dose. All right, done optimizing. All right, so let's go over just a couple of, for instance, scenarios, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do when this finishes is I'm going to normalize to whatever coverage I need, all right? So for this plan, we're just going to do our standard 100%, covering 95% of our volume. So that coverage, our hotspot's only 107.8. It's very good, very acceptable. All right, I'm going to scroll through my plan, make sure we look fairly conformal. There's no weird streaking. Nothing looks out of the ordinary. Looks pretty good to me. All right. After that, we're going to evaluate our OARs against the constraints that we're given. So let's just look at a couple of for instances. Let's say we're looking at this DVH, and one of our constraints is that he wants 50% of our dose, so 25/20 on our rectum, to be less than 30% of our rectum, right? So right here. So we need our line to move from here. We're at 38% right now to 30%. All right, just as an example. So that's a pretty big jump. It's 8% that we need that to move. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come look at that isodose line. So our 50% line is our white line. And I'm going to scroll up and down that OAR and see if there's anywhere I think I can actually move that line. Okay, so a good rule of thumb when you're looking at a dose distribution is for conventionally fractionated plans, so meaning you can't have a big hotspot basically, and the volumes are usually bigger and, you know, oddly shaped, conventional fractionated plan, you can generally get fall off between 5 and 10% of your dose every millimeter, okay? And the larger your volume is, or the more oddly shaped it is, you're going to be closer to that 5%, okay? And the smaller it is, the more round it is, things like that, the closer you can get to that 10%. So for a very complex, large volume like this, I would expect to be closer to that 5%. So that means 5% per millimeter. So to get to 50% of the dose, that means I should be able to do that within 1 cm, right? 5% per millimeter, that'd be 10 millimeters to get to 50%. So we can, use our little measure tool up here, come at our 100% dose, this red line, and measure to this 50% line, and look at that, we're like right there at that 1 cm. Okay, so to get it any less than 1 cm, it's gonna be difficult. Maybe not impossible, right? But it's gonna be a little bit difficult. We've already pushed on it quite a bit. What'll start to happen is it'll start to throw hot spots, you know, on either side of the rectum in order to get that any closer. But in general, for very large or complex fields or anything like that, you have multiple OERs on either side of the PTV. When you got a lot going on, you're looking for that 5% per millimeter. And it doesn't have to be looking at 50% dose. So let's say another one is he wants 4,000, you know, to be less than 15%. So we're at about 20% right now, so we would need to move that 5%. But again, 4,000 is about your 80% line. So you just look at your 80% line, this orange line, right? And again, you can literally measure from your 100 to your 80. And 80%, so that'd be about 4 millimeters, something like that. 5% would be about 4 millimeters. We're less than that, right? So again, I'm just, it's going to be tough to move that dose out of there, right? So, and literally, that's about all we're covering our PTV with, right? Wait a second. I was looking at the wrong line. I was looking at our PTV. So 100 to 80% right here. 0.46. So we can maybe push a little bit more on that line. Okay. So moral of the story is, you know, if we were looking at 50%, moving that 8%, we need to move that line 8% down. I think that's gonna be pretty tough because we're already below that 1 cm, right? If we were looking at 4,000, moving that might be doable. So if I needed both of those to move, I would come in here in my optimizer, and I'm going to look at my constraints. If I need to add a constraint, if I don't think any of my constraints are going to be pushing on that specific part of the line, you can just add one. So again, we were looking at 50%, or no, we were looking at 50% overdose, so 25/20. We want it to be less than 30%. So that's literally where I want my line to go. I would probably then drag that down a little bit, right? So we're gonna push on that constraint, see if we can get that to move any. And then we were looking at 4,000. It's at about 20% right now. We want it to get to 15. So again, I'm just gonna type that in so I can see exactly where it is on the DVH. But then I'm gonna drag that down a little bit. And since I think my plan in general looks pretty good, I'm just trying to push a little extra hard. I'm not going to back it up to level 2. I'm just going to put it back in level 3. We're just trying to fine tune the plan a little bit, right? So I think 8% at 50 is a bit of a stretch, right? Just based on evaluating our plan. I think the 4,000 to 15% is maybe we can get a little bit close, right? But still going to be tough. So I'm going to pause it. Oh, I forgot to put a number in here. So I start with 50, right? So this constraint right here, the cost function is only 4%. We're going to have to start bumping that up, right? This one, same thing, only 3%. Bump that up a little bit. Bump it up again. I'm just doing 20 at a time. And basically, we can do that until we feel like we're just losing too much coverage. At some point, you're just gonna lose coverage, right? So I always want to keep that PTV above my OARs, unless I want to lose coverage. If a doctor's like, we don't need 95% coverage, go down to 90% coverage, then that's a different story. Maybe we allow it to get we push until it does get a little bit cold, right? So we definitely have a noticeable shoulder up here, so we're definitely getting some cold spots in our PTV. But it looked like both areas did come down. So we can put another upper in here just to look at this. So 30% at 25/20. So that line does look like we are under that constraint, right? It's very, very close. So that's good. That's cool. We did what I thought we probably could not do. This one's also pretty close. Looks like we're probably not quite meeting that. Well, we're not. You look here, it's above 4,000. So I'm going to give each of these just another extra little push. See, when I did that, it jumped up and it just kind of flattened out. So we're probably pretty stuck at this point. You can, of course, if these are must-have constraints that we just have to meet, you can, of course, keep pushing on these. But I think at this point, since we're not seeing any improvement after I make that push, we're just going to start losing coverage, right? So let's just let this play on through. So both of these, if we're not meeting, we're very, very, very close. So just another good example of, even though I didn't think we could maybe get the 50% line to move much more out of that rectum, we were able to do it, right? So moral of the story is always give it a shot. Always try. You'll be surprised at what the optimizer can do, especially if you kind of follow this general method, right? So we're going to let this play out and take another look. The same thing, I'm going to normalize to whatever coverage I need. Take a look at my hot spot, 108, still very acceptable. I'm going to scroll through my plan, look for any noticeable problems. Looks pretty good. So if all that looks good, then I'm going to start looking at our DVH. So you can see up here, we do have a pretty noticeable shoulder, right? So our minimum dose on our PTV is only 72%. So it's always something to keep in mind, right? We don't have a constraint on that. I wasn't really pushing on that min dose, but you might need to. So always look at that. We're pushing really hard on our OARs, right? So that's why we're forcing that cold spot, right? But for this case, that's perfectly fine. Usually, if I'm not given a min dose really on my PTV, I'm kind of gonna allow that as long as I keep really good coverage on my CTVs and GTVs, okay? So you want the min dose on your CTVs and GTVs probably to be a little bit higher, but my opinion, and most of the doctors I think will accept a little bit colder min dose on your PTV in order to meet OAR constraints, as long as your CTV and GTV are okay. But it's not always the case. Sometimes you need that good min dose on your PTV, like from last week from the lung case, for example. Okay. So we were looking at 25/20, so 50% of our dose. We were trying to get that under 30. Oh, we're so close. So close. So I might even try to run this another time to get that 0.7% lower. And then we were looking at 4,000. About right there, under 15, and that did come down. So I was pretty confident about this one. I was not so sure about this one, but we got really, really close. So it might definitely be possible. But again, I just came to those conclusions by looking at our actual dose distribution. If we measure now, so from 100 to 50, we're still about same thing. So we're not able to probably do much better than that 5%, like I was saying, on such a big, large volume, but it was still, you know, able to carve out some of that dose, probably a little bit throughout the whole thing, right? And it just added up to that 7-8% that we needed. All right, so pretty good. So keep that in mind. You know, 5 to 10% per millimeter is what you should be shooting for. The larger the volume you're dealing with, the closer to 5% you'll be. The smaller the volume and the more round that volume is, you can look closer to that 10%. Okay, for conventional fractionated, for like SRS, SBRT, you can usually do better than 10% even, but for conventional, 5 to 10%. All right, so I'm gonna give you guys some constraints to work on based on this plan that I just ran right now. So the constraints I give you are gonna be based on this plan we just ran in this class. So all the constraints will be very possible to meet. All right, other than that, if you have any questions, please reach out.